Today I'm going to do the video on the Jfk Mlk. It's very complex, so I might do a part 1 and part 2. It depends on how it goes. Okay. First I want to do is I'm going to call this CI op killed JFK and MLK. And first I want to do is what happened. I'm going to begin with Kennedy first, John F. Kennedy, and then I'll go into Martin Luther King. Though, believe it or not, both of those things, both those two men, and the reasons why they were assassinated are related, absolutely related. In Kennedy's administration, when he was elected, he was elected mainly on the civil rights issue. And his vice president, Lyndon B. Johnson, was quite supportive of civil rights. Even though he came from Texas, he still more or less was supportive of civil rights. What happened was there was the Vietnam War. Now, the Vietnam War is, after we came out of World War II, actually before World War II, they had the League of Nations. And the strong arm, or the military might behind the League of Nations, was Britain. After World War II, especially after the Marshall Plan of dividing up Europe, after World War II, with the United Nations, the United States of America became the strong arm or the military might behind the United Nations, and Britain more or less took a back seat to it. So then we wound up with several different wars. Of course, the Middle East and Israel and the Arab states, but also we wound up with the Korean War. We moved into Asia, went into the Korean War, and then along with France and their military might, between Britain, France, which really worked hand in hand during the First World War. And after the Second World War, France and Britain worked hand in hand. But mainly you had the United States of America. So you had the Korean War, then you had the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War was a CIA operation. It was all about military, CIA, Pentagon, U.S. Department of Defense, whatever have you. And the Vietnam War was really related to the Korean War. And eventually, what happened was, through the Vietnam War, Cuba came into play, because Cuba and Russia worked hand in hand and backed the communist forces that were in Vietnam. Now, before I get into anything else, I want to speak about communism. Now, communism is really no different than terrorism as we know it today, no different than Bolshevism, being a Bolshevik back in Lenin days. Then you had socialism mainly in France and Britain. And all that came from basically these basic concepts, even though Karl Marx played a role in it. It actually came from the Fabian Society in Britain, which was very socialist, about the turn of I'd say the 20th century, around 1900 or so, 1905. So a lot of those socialist ideas started to come into play. But, you have capitalism, socialism, and communism, and of course the ultimate would be fascism. Nevertheless, socialism is sort of a lukewarm, sort of a medium ground there. What you really usually have is capitalism or communism, and then they both go into fascism. So, communism, which basically grows out of socialism, it's really capitalism, communism, fascism. So, they were fighting these ideas of communism. Now, men, or women for that matter, create these ideas. They create these conflicts. There's such a thing as a Hegelian dialectic. I spoke about that in another video. And that is you create a problem, you resolve the problem, and you benefit from the problem. So you had to have two forces to create that problem. And that is you had the republic/capitalism and communism/fascism. And these are the two forces that are always going on. Now, nowadays it's terrorism, but in communism a little bit, mainly it's terrorism. But you have these two forces always going on. And it's created by the wealthy elite. It's created by governments in order to keep things going. To say it's like the blame game, the shell game, to shift the game back and forth. It's really just a man-made idea. It's just created by the very wealthy elite and the government in order to keep the mass majority of people, not only in America but around the world, always in conflict. So you had that backdrop of those two forces always going on. And then, of course, you had Korea. You had, of course, they overthrew Iranian leader, and then they overthrew many other leaders down in South America via the CIA. And all these things are adding up to the Vietnam War. It's just a long series of moments or movements or associations backed by the CIA. The CIA has all these operations going on. So through a long period of time, since World War II, even before that, but they really pretty much made themselves who they are after World War II. A lot of it's even based on Nazism. There was a general of the Secret Service. His name was Gehlen, Gehlen. I read a book of his once called The Service. And he speaks about how after World War II, the CIA decided to bring Gehlen to the United States. Even though he killed people, was involved in serious atrocities in Nazi Germany, he was still brought to America and given shelter and protection. He was never tried in the Nuremberg trials. The CIA gave him cover. And they pretty much learned from this guy named Gehlen in order to do all these sneaky, underhanded, undercover kind of things that they did under Hitler. And a lot of CIA, especially in the 50s, in the 1960s, is based, believe it or not, on Nazi doctrine. A lot of it's based on the way Hitler did the things he did. So, nevertheless, you have those two forces going on. Capitalism/republic and then communism/fascism. Those two forces are going on. So CIA is slowly, through all their operations since World War II, slowly moving into that direction of the Vietnam War. Now, behind all those wars that are going on, and those assassinations and plots and coup d'etats and all those things that are going on throughout the 50s and into the early 60s, was one man that was really behind, I'd say probably 99% of it. Outside of Hoover, Edgar Hoover of the FBI, I'm speaking strictly to CIA. The FBI covers up investigations. That's what they do best. They snoop and they pry and they violate the Fourth Amendment and the First Amendment. But the CIA trashes all of the Constitution. All of the U.S. Constitution is completely trashed when it comes to the CIA. The CIA is the head of the snake. The body of the snake is the FBI and whatever else comes after them. Even the NSA doesn't have the kind of power, believe it or not, that the CIA has. That's how serious the CIA has been in place and doing all the things that it's been doing. That's how much power they have. So, the one man behind the CIA was a man named Allen Dulles, Dulles. Eventually it became the CIA director. And he was involved in assassinations and plots and coups d'etats and many black ops throughout the 50s into the early 60s. I mean, he was a guy that came out of World War II that did a lot of assassinations and plots within that war itself. He had people feared him. He had connections. You mess with Allen Dulles, you wind up dead, or tortured, brainwashed, whatever have you. This is the kind of power this one man had. And under Allen Dulles was a gentleman by the name of, I believe his name was Richard Bissell. I have to sort of look at my notes to remember the names. Yeah, Richard M. Bissell, Jr. And he was the deputy director for plans, and he worked directly under Allen Dulles. Of course, Allen Dulles was quote-unquote the dictator, but Richard Bissell worked right under him. And then there was another gentleman by the name of Charles Cabell, Cabell. And he was a deputy director, which also worked right under Allen Dulles. So you had Allen Dulles, Richard Bissell, and Charles Cabell. These are, triangle or whatever you want to call it. I don't know. It's just sort of ridiculous, but that's what it is. So these are the three guys that really ran the show. You see many faces and names and titles in the CIA, but the top dog was Allen Dulles. Two people that were right under him, Richard Bissell and Charles Cabell. Now, they were involved in this thing with Cuba. Now, Cuba worked hand in hand with Russia, which eventually got you into the Vietnam War. The backdrop was that Cuba, Castro, which probably was very well insulated, they couldn't get to him. But what happened was Kennedy, now, brings you to Kennedy. Kennedy, I think, wanted to work things out. He wanted to negotiate. He wanted to talk about things. He wanted to work things out as peaceful as possible. And there's a period of time there with the Bay of Pigs that what happens is it sort of is the preface, or it's sort of the beginning of that Vietnam War in that time period with the Bay of Pigs. Even the Gulf of Tonkin, but really it was the Bay of Pigs. And what it was they had an operation going on in Cuba to overthrow Castro through guerrilla warfare, or through sort of a bunch of civilians in Cuba that were going to assassinate him. And then you had Russia that was also sending ships into the Atlantic Ocean, the Gulf of Mexico, but mainly the Atlantic Ocean. And between those forces that were going on, Russia, Cuba, and America, Kennedy was caught in the middle. And Kennedy wanted to work things out verbally. He didn't want to really take any action. So he did give the okay on this civilian uprising within Cuba. And, of course, there were a bunch of gun runners. Now, you got to remember that key phrase there, gun runner, because the gun running takes you into MLK. You have to understand that's the gun running that was going on with the CIA. In other words, the CIA would have these operations, and they'd run guns. They do it today. You're not going to, even today, which is what, June 3rd, 2015, something's going on somewhere that the CIA is underhandedly involved in some kind of gun or ammunition or weaponry or whatever have you. Some kind of operation is going on, believe me, right now with CIA. Illegally. Okay? Because that's what they do. They do black ops. So what happened was they had these gun running things going on in Cuba. And it didn't work out as planned. And it was a huge embarrassment to Kennedy, as well as the fact that the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the CIA and the Pentagon, the U.S. Department of Defense, and all these other characters wanted to go to war with Russia because of the fiasco that was going on with Cuba. And Kennedy was like, he more or less shrugged it off. And he took the odds that probably it won't happen. So the CIA and those guys looked at Kennedy like it was a soft, like, you're a punk. What are you, pushover or something? Because you got to understand, the Pentagon, CIA, Department of Defense, they're thugs. That's all they are. Bunch of fucking thugs with big weapons, big boys on the block. One has a pipe and the other guy got a brick, the other guy got a chain, the other guy's got some brass knuckles. Picking on this little red-haired, freckle-faced kid that all he wants to do is go to school so we won't be late. These are the kind of punk fucking assholes you have in the Pentagon, the CIA, and the U.S. Department of Defense. They got big, expensive weaponry at your own expense, taxpayer money, and all the little black op deals they make on the side. And they like to start fights. They like that. They have that. Under the pretense of, pretext of, it's security. Bullshit, it's not security. They just like to play with big guns, And maybe they all have little cocks. I really don't know. I can't tell you that. But I tell you one thing, they do have some big fucking guns and very expensive guns. Very expensive missiles and spy satellites and all this other shit. So they looked at Kennedy like he was that red-haired, freckle-faced kid. And he was like, you little mousy motherfucker. Man, you're a fucking commander and chief commander. Step up to the plate. Be a boss. Be like us. Hey, We look at all these fucking ranks we got on our fucking ass shirts. You know, we don't have these ranks for nothing, you know. All these prestigious awards that we've gotten over the years for killing people. So, hey, you know, be like us, you know, like a mafia guy, right? Hey, big shot, right? So Kennedy, they looked at Kennedy like he was a pussy, like a pussy. So what happened was eventually the Bay of Pigs didn't work out. Plus, he was a pussy with Russia. And what happened there was that it embarrassed the Kennedy administration. Now, this is a line from Kennedy. I'm going to quote. This is what Kennedy says to Bissell and Dulles in the Oval Office. Quote, in a paramilitary government, I'd have to resign. But in this government, I can't. So you and Ellen have to go. Unquote. So what does Kennedy do? Because of the Bay of Pigs fiasco and embarrassment to his administration, and plus he said, what did he say? Kennedy said after the Bay of Pigs invasion failure, he says, quote, splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it into the winds, unquote. Because he didn't like that tough shit, that tough guy stance. That's not Kennedy. Kennedy wasn't like that. So that's the kind of politician he was. And so what he did was he fired Allen Dulles, Richard Bissell, and Charles Cabot. Now what happened there, though, now you got to remember, Allen Dulles was a very, he had connections deep in government that even Kennedy probably never knew about. That's the kind of connections he has. In other words, when I mean by connections, Allen Dulles says, do it, and it's done. That's the kind of connections he had. People listen to him, and people act upon whatever he says. He puts them on writing, but probably it was all verbal or eye to eye or whatever have you. The point is if Allen Dulles said it, regardless if he's the CIA director or not, they're going to do it. Because that's the kind of connections he has. Because if they don't do it, they'll wind up dead themselves. Buried in the ground, scattered amongst the wind, so to speak. So people did what Allen Dulles said to do. What does Kennedy do? Kennedy freaking fires these guys. That takes a lot of balls to do that. All of a sudden, he's not the red-haired, freckle-faced kid anymore. He's like a big, tough guy. He fires all three of them. Now, what happens, though, Allen Dulles, he didn't quite care for that. He didn't quite care for being fired by this pussy, so to speak. So what does he do? He creates a plan to assassinate JFK. What happens is they concoct this plan. Like anyone concocts a plan. You could plan for the future. Everyone does it legally, hopefully, but I do things legally. But you plan for your future, you think it out, you think of the options, the odds, the evens, all this other crap, right? You strategize, and that is basically what Allen Walsh Dulles did. What he did was, they found a place in Dallas, Texas. Now, in order to pull it off in Dallas, Texas, this is the key. The key to it all is this. Charles Cabot, who was a deputy director, his brother, Earl Cabot, was the Dallas mayor. He was the Dallas mayor. He ran the show. The Dallas mayor is in charge of the police force. He's in charge of the politics in Dallas. He's in charge of planning and making policy for any kinds of protests or parades or limousine, when limousines go down the block, like what Kennedy was in. Now it's all planned by, these are my notes, it's all planned, thinking about it, I think this will just be part one. It's all planned by the Dallas mayor. Dallas mayor planned that. Now he's the brother of the guy that just got fired by Kennedy. So they found the right place to kill Kennedy. They put him right dead center in Dallas. Two brothers and Allen Dulles. Can't beat that. And what Earl Cabell, which is the mayor of Dallas, now I'm reading from my notes, he oversaw local police departments. So he was in charge of Jesse Edward Curry, Curry. He was the chief of the Dallas Police Department. He also graduated from FBI National Academy in 1951, so he also had some connections. Now, in order to put this in perspective, you had a line of limousines or a procession going down through that, where the book depository was at, through that street there. You had a procession of cars. And what you have is you had the lead car. Now, Jesse Curry, which is the chief Dallas Police Department, he drove the lead car. So he's leading all the other cars to where they should go. He decides how fast they go, where they turn, and everything. Understand? Now you start to get the picture. He's leading that entire procession of vehicles through all the streets, different speeds. He decides how it's going to be. Now remember, the guy in charge of the chief of Dallas Police Department was the mayor of Dallas, which is the brother of the deputy director of the CIA. The car behind the leader, or the lead car, was JFK. Now, they were all going about 10 miles per hour. That's very, very slow. Very slow, which is an easy shot. I mean, if you're going by 25, 30, 40 miles an hour, this is going to be difficult to take the person out. But if you're only going 10 miles per hour, you're going very slow down that road. Very easy target. And behind JFK, the third car, was the Secret Service. And then the fourth car behind the Secret Service was the Vice President, was Johnson. And then the fifth car behind the Vice President was the mayor, the Dallas mayor. And the sixth car behind the Dallas mayor was the National Press pool car, meaning all the cameras and all that other crap. And then the next car, the seventh car, is the camera car. And there's other cars. There's like 50 cars in the procession. But we want to basically focus in on that basic procession there. So you had the lead car by Jesse Curry, who was the chief of Dallas Police Department. The second car was JFK. And the third car was Secret Service, and then the fourth car is the VP, Vice President Johnson. Now, Earl Cabell, Cabell, which is the brother of Charles Cabell, which was the former deputy director of the CIA, he was involved in planning the trip that Kennedy made on November 22nd, 1963. He oversaw all of the ceremonial activities, including parade, routes, and motorcades. So he oversaw all of that. Understand? You get in the picture? He oversaw everything, man. They had it planned, man, between the two brothers and Allen Dulles and the rest of these characters. He had it all planned. Of course, they needed a patsy, some schmuck. Didn't know shit for nothing. He didn't even know how to tie his shoelaces, probably. Who knows? Just kidding, actually. But they needed a schmuck. What better way of having a schmuck? He bounced back and forth to Russia, back and forth here, back and forth. And Russia's the communist state, all this crap. And, I won't even get into Oswald, because Oswald is whoever buys that is either average intelligence, extremely brainwashed, or just insane. So I'm not even going to get into the whole thing with Oswald, because that's just like smoke and mirrors. I mean, if you're going to get into Oswald, that's just, you'll be thinking about Oswald for the next 1,000 years and still won't have any answers, because that's just game. That's a game. All you got to know is he was a patsy, meaning they needed a dupe. They needed a decoy. They needed someone to put all the shit and blame on. Now, and I just want to say something real quick, which will eventually take us into this part 2 with Martin Luther King. You also had the mob that was involved. Okay, now the mob has worked with the CIA since the 1950s, especially the late 1950s. They worked with Trafficante and Morcello and those characters. And they sort of even had a stake in Cuba. They were with Havana with the casinos and all that. But that's really nothing. The main point is that they work, CIA does whatever it wants, even to this day. So they work with the mob, and they're like the mob is like the foot soldiers, And if you ever saw the movie Serpico, it tells you here's a good cop, and the other cops, and they, he's turns into a rat, and Serpico winds up almost dying in that movie. He's banished, so to speak, from the police department. Understand? So with the mob, as long as you're on the same sides, who gives a shit? So the CIA and the mob worked hand in hand for a very long time. There shouldn't be any surprise. Of course, one of the reasons why they took out, I don't want to get too much into this, and I won't get into it, but one of the reasons why Robert Kennedy was taken out was because he went after the mob in the early 60s. But I'm not going to get into Robert Kennedy. To me, that's neither here nor there. But let's stick with JFK. So anyway, they had the mob working with the CIA. Between the mob, Cuban exiles, CIA, they took JFK out. The main point you must remember always is it was a CIA operation. And being it was a CIA operation, it covers everything. They're in control of the mob. They're in control of Cuban exiles. They're in control of all the black ops, all those operations. It was a CIA plot. And the head of the snake was Allen Dulles. So anyway, here comes Kennedy. 10 miles an hour, down the road there, down the street. And it was like going hunting for a deer. That's how easy it was. And they took his ass out. And it wasn't Oswald. It was some guy behind a fence that had the best aim. There was other shooters as well, of course. But the one that did take him out was one guy that put the bullet into the side of his head and blew his fucking brains right the fuck out of his head. Actually, Kennedy's brain, part of his brain, a good portion of his brain was actually laying on the back seat of his limousine. That's how much power. And it wasn't very far, because, you know, if you remember, if you know what it looks like, you have the fence here, some lawn here, the street with the limousine, as opposed to the book depository window all the way in the back. This was a clear shot, baby. 10 miles an hour. Clear shot. Took his fucking brain right out of his fucking head, man. That was it for Kennedy. Why? Because he fucked with Ellen Dulles. He fucked with Ellen Dulles. And so then it's just a question of fucking up it's just a question of fucking up the investigation. That's when the FBI comes into play. The FBI can either omit things in investigations, they can cover things up, they can slow things down, they can steer you this way, steer you that way, don't ask questions, or not even ask questions that they should, or all this other shit. So that's where the FBI comes into play. They screw up their investigation, so you don't find out the truth. It wasn't anything to do with anything else but Ellen Dulles. That's all it was. And that's why those records were sealed to 2038, because by that time, definitely everyone that had anything to do, even in an extremely minor way, just taking an order from another top guy, all those guys be dead in the ground. Be somewhat of an embarrassment for the government, but for the federal government. But, no one can be prosecuted that way. When those, all of the JFK documents are unclassified in 2038. They'll all be dead, or everyone be dead. That had anything to do with that JFK assassination. Same with like MLK, they put 50 years on that. Everyone would be dead by then. But anyway, that's my part 2. So the point is, JFK defied Ellen Dulles. Ellen Dulles was quote-unquote the president, not JFK. See, so JFK didn't understand that. CIA runs the show, not JFK. The CIA director runs the show, not JFK. Not the President of the United States, not Obama, CIA. So they took him out. And then the FBI screwed up the investigation. Then what do? They get the Warren Commission. Just like the 9/11 Commission, all that other shit. They get the Warren Commission. And who's sitting in that Warren Commission? Ellen Dulles. Ellen Dulles is advising everyone on the Warren Commission the rules and how to interpret things and how to look at things and how to omit things and how to steer things. And that was it. That was the end of JFK. And everything else is left up to confusion. Left up to complete, utter confusion. The American people still to this day wonder who took out JFK. The person that took out JFK was Ellen Dulles. He's the guy. With his deputy director, Charles Cabell, who was the brother of Dallas Mayor Earl Cabell. And there's other things as well in place. But people say, yeah, but how can they keep that conspiracy so quiet? Doesn't take much. If you only have like 2-3 people in charge of the whole operation, everyone else is just taking orders. And all you need is a couple good sharpshooters, and take out somebody. They do it all the time in the other countries, in these black ops. To them, what's the big deal taking JFK? And to them, JFK was the enemy against what they were doing as far as their black ops were concerned. To them, they considered JFK the enemy. So they took him out. So I can delve into a little more, but that's pretty much JFK, and that's pretty much. And when I get into my MLK, it'll actually make the JFK make even more sense. And Allen Dulles plays a minor role in the MLK situation. Martin Luther King, the two things that are in common, the reason why they took out JFK as well as MLK is because they opposed the Vietnam War. They opposed it. And JFK opposed the Vietnam War. He did it. I can't remember the number. It was an executive order, and he decided to not participate in the Vietnam War, which pissed off everyone in the power community, CIA, Pentagon, U.S. Department of Defense. That certainly didn't help him. Certainly didn't help him to prevent being assassinated. But the Vietnam War, they definitely wanted that because there's billions of dollars involved as far as ammunition and weaponry, and they can play the game of capitalism / republic and communism / fascism, and they could play the game back and forth. It's to get the one asshole, the red-haired, freckle-faced kid out of the way, so to speak. They can have their war games. Because that's all it is. Unfortunately, people die and get wounded in the process. I can't imagine having a bullet in your heart, or having a bullet in your leg, or even in your hand, or in your eye. Excruciating pain. I can't imagine dying that way. It's amazing. It could always happen to any one of us, of course, but the pain, I can't. You stub your toe sometimes on a wooden table leg. That hurts like shit. I can't imagine, having a bullet in you or something like that. Being tortured or shit like that. That happens in war. Plus, there's billions of dollars in the Vietnam War, as all wars. Boeing and Honeywell and all these characters, they make a lot of money, make a lot of contracts with the government. So there's a lot of money at stake. But Kennedy was mainly assassinated or shot because he defied the CIA. He defied the CIA director. He defied Allen Dulles. And they took his ass out. And what that has to do with MLK also sort of pretty much went down the same route. I mean, outside of his tent city that he was going to do in Washington, D.C., and the U.S. government was afraid he was getting a little too much power, asking for a little too much for a civil rights movement. That was sort of a backdrop as to really the reason why they took MLK out, because he was starting to really, people started to really listen to him and actually act upon the things he would say. And he, well, I won't get into too much, just a little bit of it. April 4th of 1968, they assassinated MLK. In April 4th of 1967, that's when he came out in a very direct confrontational way to the U.S. government and opposed the Vietnam War. He spoke about that a little bit here and there, previously to that time. But then he became very, very strong in his opposition to the Vietnam War. And even though Johnson had supported him with the civil rights, he did not support him with the Vietnam War stance. And that was one of the main reasons why they took MLK out, which is relative to JFK. Of course, JFK, it was the Vietnam War, sure, but it was mainly Allen Dulles and defying that CIA community, defying the CIA director. That had really what it was all about. And they were going to say to that little red-haired, freckle-faced kid, so to speak. I know JFK is not red-haired, freckle-faced, but you know what I mean. A little squirrely little kid in his shorts, his little striped little short-sleeved shirt, skinny little kid, out there in the sun playing with his bowl and he has his lunchbox, skipping down the sidewalk. They showed that little kid, no, we're the big boys on the block, and we're going to kick your ass down the street because you fucked with us. And so that's what they did. They killed JFK. They killed him because he defied the powers that be. There was a lot of power and a lot of money at stake. And they weren't going to let fucking JFK have his way and disrupt that whole fucking thing. Let alone, like he said, he's going to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces. And Johnson, on the other hand, gave him the war. Johnson said, yeah, have your war. Keep the CIA in place, cool. I'll keep my mouth shut. You know, all this other shit, you know. So anyway, that's my my video on JFK, and I'll get into him a little bit more, because it's relative to MLK to a large degree, not to a large degree, but to a minor degree in the sense of the Vietnam War, and that Martin Luther King got himself wrapped up into that Vietnam War, which was sponsored solely by the CIA. And it turned into a very troublesome situation, and eventually led to Martin Luther King's death. But anyway, so that's it in a nutshell. So anybody ever ask you who killed JFK? Allen Dulles killed JFK. And on that, I will end. And I'll speak to you about part 2 on MLK next day or two or so, somewhere in there. You guys have a good day.